I'm Hilda. It's been 3 weeks since my sister's wedding, an extravagant $120,000 affair attended by 200 guests at a lavish estate in Beverly Hills. That night, as I sat at table 25 with a 9-year-old boy and 4 other kids under 12, my place card read simply Ms. Hilda. It was as if I had no achievements to speak of, while others' cards flaunted titles like Dr. Thompson, surgeon, and Mr. Harris, CEO of a tech startup. My mother, sitting at the head table elevated above the rest of the room, held her 3rd glass of champagne and shouted across the tent, "Hilda, at least you got a plate." Some guests let out awkward laughs, and others looked away. But what they didn't know was that I'd requested to sit at table 25. I'd texted Linda Thompson, the wedding planner, 2 weeks before, specifically asking her to seat me there because I knew who else would be there and what would happen when that 9-year-old boy asked me a simple question. Let me rewind and tell you how I got to this point. My sister, Lily, is 24 years old. She's a rising star in Wall Street, working as an investment banker at a big firm and raking in an annual salary of $250,000 with bonuses. She graduated from Harvard Business School in 2022 with honors. When she received her job offer, my parents threw a party for 100 people at a fancy restaurant in Manhattan and posted about it on social media countless times. I'm 27. I teach special education at the local community center. I make $75,000 a year. I also graduated from a well-known university, Yale, with a degree in education, summa cum laude. But when I got my job at the community center, my parents only had a small family dinner with 6 people, no grand announcements on social media. The difference in their reactions wasn't about academic achievements or the prestige of the universities. It was about our career choices. Lily chose a high-profile, well-paid career in finance, a path that my parents could easily boast about at their fancy dinner parties where everyone's children were in equally prestigious fields. I chose to work with children who had learning disabilities, children who struggled to keep up in regular schools, and children whose families couldn't afford expensive private tutoring. My parents didn't approve of my choice from the start. One Christmas, about 5 years ago, I overheard my mother talking to her friend on the phone. "Lily is doing so well on Wall Street. She'll be a millionaire in no time," she said. Then there was a pause, and she continued, "Hilda? Oh, she works with special needs kids at a community center. I just don't understand why she wasted her Yale education on something like that." She didn't know I was standing in the hallway, listening. Since then, my marginalization in the family started to grow. My name got smaller on the family holiday cards each year. By 2023, I wasn't included in the family portrait. Lily said the photographer ran out of time, but we had been waiting for over an hour. So for 3 months, I spent every weekend with Emily, teaching her basic communication skills using simple games and picture books. One day, she looked at me and said, "Thank you, Hilda," clearly and deliberately. Her mother cried, and so did I. That was the moment I decided to devote my career to helping these children. I could have gone to law school, spent another 3 years and a fortune in student loans, and become a corporate lawyer making a fortune. But Emily and kids like her couldn't wait for me to finish law school. So I applied to the community center. They offered me a starting salary of $60,000, and I accepted. I didn't tell my parents until a week before I started. At dinner, my father asked, "Hilda, which law school did you get into?" I told him, "I'm not going to law school. I got a job at the community center teaching special education." There was a long silence at the table. My mother put down her fork and said, "A job at a community center? What kind of future is that? What will we tell our friends?" I didn't answer. I knew their verdict was already in. Over the next few years, I worked with dozens of children at the community center. Some of them were completely non-verbal when they first came to me, and after months or even years of hard work, they were able to communicate with their families and classmates. I never charged families who couldn't afford it, and I worked with others on a sliding scale basis according to what they could pay. Then, a few years ago, Linda Thompson came to the community center. She was a well-known event planner in Beverly Hills, organizing high-end weddings and corporate events. She had a son, Jake, who was 5 years old at the time and had autism. Insurance wouldn't cover the intensive therapy he needed, and private therapy was too expensive for her. She'd heard about my work from a mutual friend and asked if I could work with Jake. I said yes. We started working together on a Tuesday, and I remember it clearly because it was Jake's birthday. He was so shy at first, barely making eye contact with me. But over time, with consistent work and lots of patience, he started to progress. By the end of the first year, he could say simple words like mom, Jake, and book. By the second year, he could form short sentences. And by this year, at the age of 8, he could read simple stories. I never accepted a single cent from Linda, even though she tried to pay me every session. I always told her, someone has to help these kids, and insurance should cover this, but since it doesn't, I'll do it. When Lily got engaged last year, I didn't say anything about the fact that I'd probably worked with kids whose parents would be at the wedding. Her fiancé, Ryan, was a wealthy real estate developer with a net worth of over $20 million. Their engagement party cost over $50,000, and my mother was over the moon. She posted about it on social media immediately, showing off photos of the diamond ring and the luxurious venue. I liked the post and commented with a congratulations message, but I wasn't tagged in any of the posts. The wedding planning started in full swing. The venue deposit was $30,000, and the total budget was set at $120,000. There were 8 bridesmaids, all of Lily's fancy Wall Street friends, and I found out I wasn't in the bridal party through a social media post. Lily texted me later saying, Ryan's family is very traditional. They wanted the bridal party to be people who'd known us as a couple for a long time. You understand, right? I told her it was okay. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother showed me the seating chart. We're seating you at table 25 with Linda and her son. You work with kids, so you'll be comfortable there, she said. I looked at the chart and saw that it was clearly the overflow table with mostly children and some extended family members. I said, this is basically the kids' table. My mother replied, it's the family overflow table. And someone has to watch the kids, and you're good with them. When I saw Jake's name on the chart, I had an idea. I texted Linda that night, I saw the seating chart. I'm at your table. Is Jake coming? She texted back, yes. Jake will be so excited to see you. I replied, perfect. A few days before the wedding, my mother called to ask about my place card. We're putting people's professional titles on the cards to help networking. What should I put for you? She asked. I knew what was coming. What are you putting for others? I asked. She listed a bunch of fancy titles. Then she said, I was thinking just your name for you. You're not a high-profile professional like the others, and it might seem odd. I interrupted her, just put Miss Hilda, no profession. She asked if I was sure, and I said yes. After hanging up, I texted Linda, can you do me a favor? When Jake asks me questions at the wedding, let him ask. Don't stop him. She replied, what kind of questions? I typed, about what we do together, about his reading. She asked what I was planning, and I said, I'm just not hiding anymore. On the day of the wedding, I drove to the estate alone. I wore a simple black dress that I'd bought a few years ago. I arrived early to take in the beautiful setting. The ceremony was held on a lush lawn overlooking the ocean, with white chairs and a flower arch. The reception tent was decorated with twinkling lights and expensive floral arrangements. I found table 25 in the far right corner, near the kitchen entrance. The centerpiece on our table was smaller than the others. I picked up my place card. It simply said Miss Hilda. I looked at the other cards, Dr. Thompson, surgeon, Mr. Harris, CEO of a tech startup, Linda Thompson, principal of Thompson Event Planning, and Jake Thompson. The other 4 children's cards just had their names. I put my card back down and walked back to my car, sitting there until it was almost time for the ceremony. The ceremony started at 5 p.m. It was a beautiful affair, but I sat in the back row, among strangers. I noticed a few familiar faces in the crowd, the parents of some of my former students. They waved but didn't come over to talk. During the cocktail hour, I stood alone near a hedge, listening to the conversations around me about investments, luxury vacations, and business deals. At 6 p.m. I heard my mother introducing Lily to a group of guests. "This is Lily, our daughter from Wall Street. She just got promoted to vice president. Her salary is astronomical." Someone asked, "Do you have another daughter?" My mother paused and said, "Yes, Hilda is here somewhere. She works with kids." The conversation quickly moved on. At 6:28 p.m. I saw Linda arrive with Jake. He was wearing a little black suit and looked a bit uncomfortable, constantly tugging at his tie. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Ms. Hilda." He shouted and ran towards me. "Jake, you look so handsome," I said. He hugged me tightly and showed me his new watch. That's when I knew my plan was going to work. At 6:45 p.m. We were directed into the reception tent. When I walked to table 25, there were a couple of parents looking confused, saying, "I think there's a mistake. This is the kids' table." The coordinator checked the list and said, "No, this is correct. Table 25 is for children and family overflow." The parents looked at me, and I said, "I'm the bride's sister." Their expressions went blank. I sat down next to Jake, and Linda sat on his other side. The tent was filled with the sounds of people chatting and the clinking of glasses. At 6:52 p.m. I looked towards the head table. My parents were sitting there, with Lily and Ryan in the center. The table was elevated, and my mother saw me. She waved and held up her champagne glass, shouting, "Hilda, at least you got a plate." Some guests at nearby tables laughed awkwardly. Ryan's mother looked at my mother, then at me, with a curious expression. Jake tugged at my sleeve and asked, "Miss Hilda, why is everyone looking?" I told him, "They're just excited, buddy." He nodded and started looking at the menu. He pointed to a word, "Miss Hilda, what's this word?" I leaned over and said, "Sound it out." "What's the first letter?" He said, "P." I said, "Good. What sound does P make?" We went through the letters together, and he finally sounded out pasta. "You got it," I said, and he beamed with pride. Then he looked at me and said, in his loud voice, "Miss Hilda, can you teach me to read this menu like you taught me to read books at school?" The table went quiet, then the tables around us, and within seconds, the whole tent fell silent. Jake continued, "Remember when I couldn't even say my name, and you helped me, and now I can read?" The tent was completely still as 200 pairs of eyes turned to look at us. My mother stopped with her champagne glass halfway to her mouth. Ryan's mother stood up and walked towards our table. She looked at Jake, smiled, and then looked at me. "You're a teacher?" she asked. I nodded and said, "Special education at the community center." Her face changed, and she said, "The community center near the park? Our foundation has been looking into supporting an educator there. I think our director mentioned someone doing amazing work with kids with special needs, working for free in some cases. Was that you?" Before I could answer, Linda stood up. Her voice was shaking but clear as she said, "Yes, it was her. Ms. Hilda has been working with Jake every week for the past 3 years. He could barely speak when he started, and now he's reading. She never charged me a single cent. Then, one by one, other parents stood up. A woman from table 10 said, "My daughter, Sarah, was nonverbal when she came to Miss Hilda. Now she's in middle school, making friends and doing well in class." Another man from table 7 said, "My son, Ethan, had severe dyslexia. Ms. Hilda worked with him after school, and he's now reading at grade level." Ryan's mother turned to my mother and said, "Mrs. Last name, you have a remarkable daughter. Our foundation would like to meet with her and discuss funding and expansion of the community center's special education program." My mother was speechless, her champagne glass still frozen in mid-air. Lily stood up from the head table, tears streaming down her face. She walked towards me and said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her and said, "You never asked." She hugged me tightly and said, "I'm so sorry. I wish I'd known." My father also stood up and walked towards me. He stopped halfway and said, "We didn't know you were doing this kind of important work. I'm sorry for what I said before. I said, I told you years ago, but you thought I was wasting my degree." He looked down in shame. I needed some air, so I walked out of the tent. Jake followed me. "Ms. Hilda, did I do something wrong?" he asked. I knelt down and said, "No, Jake. You did everything right. Everyone was just surprised by how amazing you are." Later that night, I went back inside. My parents were standing near the bar, looking at me with a mix of shame and pride. Lily came up to me again and asked if we could have coffee to talk about my work. I said, "Yes, but not this week. I have a group of kids who need me." The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of messages and calls. Linda had told me that several families from the wedding wanted to hire me for their kids, and the foundation's assistant had called to schedule a meeting with me. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen and valued, not because of a fancy title or a high salary, but because of the real difference I'd made in the lives of those children.